All right, so we are live on YouTube currently. I just want to make sure that everybody knows that. It is 1 p.m., so I believe we will go ahead and get started. Welcome to the first meeting of the task force for reopening, a phased reopening of short-term rentals and hotels. Thank you all for joining us and for being present today. The agenda went out yesterday, and so you should all have a copy of that. And I'm just gonna pop that open real quick. Douglas, if you want to start us off here.
Thank you, Ron. As Ron has said, we all appreciate everybody coming together kind of on short notice and helping us through this difficult time and challenging kind of conundrum we find ourselves in. We would love it, and if we could first kind of go through a couple of just goals that I'll cover and objectives of what we would like to achieve. And then I would like to go through the call and have everybody just introduce themselves and give us a little bit, you know, a 10-word explanation of your interests and what you may be able to bring to the group in terms of working through this issue. So our goal is to satisfy the City Council at their emergency meeting on Saturday, May 4th. They adopted an emergency ordinance, which is number 2020-05. And one of the bullets in that ordinance was, bullet number 9. And if you don't have it, we can certainly forward it to you after the meeting. But that ordinance created, one of the objectives in that ordinance was to prepare safety guidelines and recommendations for presentation to City Council no later than May 7th. Opening prior to May 12th. So, you know, at the end of the day, there's a lot to discuss, but that really is what we're trying to develop, would be guidelines, recommendations by Thursday for council to consider. And they would consider these prior to May 12th in terms of how to open up, make short-term rentals available. I think it's kind of suggested in there that it would be limiting in some way, probably not a wholesale reopening, but some reasonable limitations that they can consider in opening up the availability of short-term rentals. So at this point, I would like if Ron, you could just kind of, if you want to raise your hand, Ron, I don't know if it's easier for you to unmute people or them to unmute themselves. Just raise your hand, explain what it is that you do, and introduce yourself to the group.
Yeah, if we want to go ahead and start with Stephen, you just raised your hand down there. I'll go ahead and unmute you.
All right, I'm Stephen Goodwin. I'm the owner of iTrip Vacations, which is part of the iTrip franchise. We manage properties all over the beach communities and downtown as well. My background is 30 years of hospitality, Hard Rock hotels, casinos, Universal Studios, theme parks. I worked through the SARS epidemic in Asia, have developed guidelines that got many facilities through that, and looking to make sure that we can open the beach safely and security for everybody.
All right. And let's just start from the top left here. Scott, Scott Kegel, would you like to?
Sure. Can you all hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. My name is Scott Kegel. I'm an attorney. I have been a resident of the Isle of Palms for quite some time. Moved off for a short period, briefly. I've been back here since 2010 or 11. I have been involved with and owned a short-term rental out here. I don't have any interest in the short-term rental business at this point, other than a concerned citizen who wants to see things reopened as soon as possible and get people back in business in these short-term rentals. I know that that's where the majority of our income for this town comes from. And I think we need to make a movement cautiously and educated to do that each day, progressing a little bit more and to getting back open fully.
All right, and I'm Ron Hanna, not as the thing in the bottom left says, Desiree Fergoso. She's the city administrator. I'm the assistant city administrator. I'm basically here to moderate and make sure that we keep on task. Sandy, I believe you're next.
Stone, been a resident on the Isle of Palm since 1973. In real estate since 78, vacation rentals since 78, vacation rentals, approximately 300 properties in the community. We have our own laundry, housekeeping, maintenance services that we provide for those properties. We have almost 200 long-term rentals that we oversee, and we do some property management for homeowners associations, oversee the pool, tennis courts, landscaping, repairs and maintenance of those properties in general. That's it.
Douglas?
I am the Director of Planning for the City of Isle of Palms. And I am not a COVID expert or a short-term rental expert at any stretch of the imagination, but I am probably closest to the short-term rental industry for the city staff because of my role or my office role in managing the rental licenses. So I kind of house the data in terms of the number and who's doing it and what their current occupancy levels are and that type of information. So that is my role, and I will probably be the lead staff in developing whatever guidelines or recommendations this group comes up with. That will probably be my role to roll it into a cohesive document with the help of Ron and the rest of the staff for presentation to City Council.
All right, Cliff Toner.
I'm Cliff Toner. My family moved to Isle of Palms in 1977. One or all of us have lived out there since. We started renting our home out there seasonally starting in the early 80s and have done that on and off. We currently self-manage it through online bookings and that type of thing, just here to kind of share that kind of voice as an independent who manages their own property. Thank you.
All right, Dudley.
Hi, I'm Dudley Spangler. My wife and I lived on Charleston Boulevard. We've been out here full time since 2012. I'm a real estate broker here on the island with Carroll Realty. We own 2 vacation condos on Front Beach, and I manage an additional condo for some other folks. I have rented my personal home out in the past on vacation rentals, and also work with Sandy and his company on my rentals.
Michael Long. It appears that you're still muted. Hang on just a second. You might need to unmute it from your end.
How's
There you
that?
go. Much better.
Thank you. Michael Long. I am on the team here at Beachside Vacations. I started my career in vacation rental management on the island in 1991 and worked with Frank and the crew at Wild Dunes for many, many years. As far as what I would hope that I can contribute would be in statistics, as a vacation rental manager, as well as, of course, my contacts with the housekeeping and maintenance community. And I would like to help wherever I can and get us back open again.
All right. Liz Bernthal?
Hi, I'm with Dunes Properties. I've been working with them for over 10 years. We manage vacation rentals on Folly Beach and about 30 on Isle of Palms. So a little bit smaller than some of the other companies, but we have successfully worked with City of Folly Beach's City Council to get vacation rentals back in action as of next week. So hoping to kind of, work with Isle of Palms to do the same thing, because it is such a huge part of the city life and economics on the islands. So hopefully we can come up with some things to get back up and running.
All right. Stephen, you already introduced yourself, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Beth Cornell?
Yes, my name is Beth Cornell. I am a property manager on the Isle of Palms. I also am a short-term rental owner of 2 units. I work primarily in the smaller 1 or 2 bedroom, shorter stay markets, minimum 3 nights, up to however long they'd like to stay. And I'd like to see this business open as swiftly and safely as possible. And I'm looking forward to being part of doing that.
All right, thank you. Aaron Rowland?
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Aaron Rowland. I work with Charlestown Hotels, and I'm an area general manager. I oversee the Palms Oceanfront Hotel here in the Isle of Palms, which is 68 rooms. As well as the Shem Creek Inn. Maybe a little bit different than some of you all. I am boots on the ground on a day-to-day basis myself and my assistant general manager. So we get a pretty good sense of guests that are still reaching out to see when we're opening and when the demand periods are looking like it's going to ramp up. So that might be some area where I hope I can contribute. And yeah, like everybody else, able to plan ahead and figure out how to safely and efficiently get the hotels back open.
All right, Ray Burns?
Ray Burns, and I'm a full-time resident of Isle of Palms. We've owned property here somewhere between 15 and 20 years. I've been here full-time for about 6. We own a beach rental in the Sea Oats community, and we've owned that for 12 years. And I manage that rental myself. So my interest in being involved in this group is to be able to understand all of the situations that we have to deal with for our renters, as well as being able to communicate information to our folks. The majority of our summer rentals are return families. They've been coming back 7, 8, 9, 10 years. So I've developed relationships with a lot of them, and I'd like to have firsthand information on communicating with them about what they need to be aware of and how they need to prepare for their visits here.
Thank you. It looks like the next gentleman in line is having some technical difficulties there. So Frank Fredericks?
Frank Fredericks, Managing Director of Wild Dunes Resort. There we go. I'm Frank Fredericks, Managing Director of Wild Dunes Resort. Thank you, Ron. And
you're welcome.
We manage about 400 vacation rental units. We also have the 93-room Boardwalk Inn hotel. We also own and operate all the amenities in Wild Dunes. My hope is that I can also assist in getting us open safely. I think that's what's most important. I know that our revenues that we produce for the city are critical, and yet I think we're all concerned about this virus and making sure we do it in a very responsible way. I also bring the background of almost as many years as Sandy Stone and a little more than Michael Long of experience. And I've been at Wild Dunes for 17 years. For those who don't know, Wild Dunes is part of the Hyatt Hotels family. So I'm fortunate to be exposed to a lot of worldwide policies regarding cleanliness, operations, and everything else. So while I can't openly share all that information directly, I can bring a lot of it to light when needed. Thanks, Ron.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Dudley?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Have you introduced yourself yet? I believe you probably did earlier and then connected with a different device.
Yeah, I did. I had a technical issue. I had to relog on
All right.
another device.
So we'll go ahead and move on to Brian Bosick. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you got that right. So I'm Brian Bossack. My day job is as an associate professor of public health at the College of Charleston, but I'm currently assisting with the COVID-19 response as a Public Health Reserve Corps volunteer with the South Carolina DHEC. And I've been asked to participate in the task force meeting to represent the kind of epidemiology, public health side through DHEC channels.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate your expertise being on the task force. And additionally, Kevin Cornett, if you would please introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. Apologize for my tardiness. As you can imagine, we're pretty busy at the PD, but I'm the chief of police for IOP. If we haven't met yet, let's get together when this is over and say hello.
All right. So that seems like it's going to be just about everybody. So if we can go ahead and launch into the discussion of guiding principles and goals for reopening. So obviously we want to do this in a safe manner. We're looking for some phases that we can use to kind of get us back to normal as quickly as possible, but also as safely as possible. As I'm sure some of you know, Council created this task force as a result of a meeting that they had recently, where it was stated that the task force was supposed to meet prior to May 6th and then generate some input by this coming Thursday for Council. So I had sent out with the invite a couple of documents that were drafts, not really suggestions, but just considerations, things to sort of consider about where we are and what might happen next. And the next thing that we have on the agenda, unless Douglas, do you want to add anything to that?
Just as a just a quick point, I don't know if Dave Konoski was having the technical difficulties. I think I see him twice in there, but I don't know that he introduced himself. Dave, can you hear us?
Dave, are you there?
Dave, you may be muted on that one. Moto Z4, Ron.
I'm trying to unmute him now. I think he's muted on his end, in which case I can't really.
I think everybody here probably knows Dave. He almost needs no introduction.
All right.
All right, we can come back to that.
Ron,
did he come in?
For a second. Yeah.
All right, I think we've lost Dave, but Ron, I would suggest, so if with the next item on the agenda being guiding principles and goals, I think that we all probably, I think that we probably all understand, and you've kind of all touched on it in your introductions about the safety of opening back up rentals, a phased approach. I think we've kind of talked about that. The next item is a COVID-19 update. And while we have Brian, I think that he is probably the best to talk to us about COVID-19, and also specifically, Brian, as you see the challenges, I'm gathering the whole group knows about, social distancing in Walmart and everything else, but if you could touch on what you see as unique challenges as they would present themselves to the hospitality world, and specifically, I guess, short-term rentals. is that something that you could just give us your insight in terms of what are, what unique items we'll find COVID-19 related to short-term rentals specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the documents that were distributed before the meeting, I think it was the Stay Safe report, the safety and sanitary measures. I just was looking through those, and I think that a lot of the recommendations make sense and are logical. I think somewhere in there or somewhere I read some suggestions about kind of phases of reopening and low levels of occupancy, medium levels of occupancy, and what that means in terms of kind of keeping family units or groups separate. Because I think the key is that if one person's infected with the virus, then they can spread it to their close contacts, obviously, and people that they're exposed to. And so reducing the risk from anyone who might be infected, I think, is where the key lies. And so some of the ideas in terms of the extra cleaning, the masking of folks who are working in customer-facing areas, the front of house, back of house signage, the extra steps being taken. I mean, basically, I was looking through those to see if there were any things that I would suggest or make recommendations differently. But right now, it looks pretty reasonable to me.
Thank you, Brian. Is there anybody else on the call? And we will get to, in the next part of the agenda, we will get to kind of the bullet points. And I would like to go through what's labeled, I think, as it's a safety and sanitary measures document 2002. But before we do that, is there anybody on the call that has other specific COVID-19 points that they would like to raise as they relate to short-term rentals?
All right, Stephen, hang on just a second. Go ahead.
There's a lot of people watching this, and we'll get into the sanitation measures, which I don't think they've seen yet. We will have a copy of those. But I do think it's important before we talk about sanitation just to kind of reflect the climate that we're in. The governor's conference last week, the state epidemiologist, Dr. Linda Bell, strongly urged anybody considered to be at risk based on CDC guidance to limit their exposure to other people. And that has to be a strong message throughout, as Doctor just said. But there's a change in the way the state's approaching this, and that is going to a contact tracing methodology. So they are going to see, they're testing more, they're going to see more cases. So I think we've got to make sure we're messaging to people that the way the state is going, things are going to change, whatever happens here today. And it's an important backdrop to where we end up with our message and how clear we are in our message to everybody, residents, visitors, alike. The governor said, specifically, that we got to be vigilant in protecting ourselves. And that underpins, I'm sure the Hyatt guidelines are the same, underpins all of the guidance from CDC, WHO. At the end of the day, there has to be a strong measure and a strong message that we need to protect ourselves from other people that may have the virus. I've got a second part to this, if you don't mind. Well, what we learned the first time going through SARS pandemics in Asia, and again, this informs all of the CDC guidelines, the WHO guidelines, and the American Hotel and Lodging Association guidelines that you guys sent out, is that the SARS-CoV-1 virus, the original one, and the SARS-CoV-2 virus are very, very similar in terms of survivability and how they move and transmit. They apparently have different effects once in the body, but I don't think that's our concern. That's for the medical profession to focus on. From our perspective as operators and professionals in a hospitality field, what that means is the virus is actually very easy to kill. It doesn't live very long, and it doesn't need any sophisticated chemical to kill it. The EPA recommended list of chemicals is very long, and the majority of those work within 2 minutes on the virus. The practical measures that we developed during SARS, which I think embodied all of the sanitation recommendations that we're going to talk about today, ultimately come down to that fact. Transmission generally occurs person to person. Very rarely does it occur home or surface to person, except within the few minutes after it has been put on a surface, and that it is easily and readily killed by good cleaning methods. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott?
Yes, I'd just like to bring up the point that essentially what we're really talking about here is opening up our community to beach vacations again. And I'm certain that this issue is going to be a big one here. When people come to beach vacation, they sit on the beach. And right now we've got this stationary thing and in motion thing. And I believe it to be incongruous with beach vacations. And I think that the conflict that's going to occur if that stays in place is going to be damaging to the rental business and to people. They don't want to be told they can't sit on the beach if they're here with their family for a vacation. So I'm not sure what the town's or what council's opinion on keeping that in place is. And I've listened to all the council meetings and I understand the purpose to prevent large groups from congregating. But I think that's something we really need to think about with this task force is what are we going to do? Do we want to tell these people you're spending $10,000 to bring your family to the beach, but you can't sit on it? So I believe that's one of the biggest nuts we have to crack here. And I think it's something that we need to put at the top of the list.
Okay. Does anyone else have anything that they would like to add under the COVID-19 update section? All right, so we'll move on then to the discussion of recommendations for council's consideration to ensure the safe reopening of lodging services on the island. The first subheading.
I have one.
Go ahead, Ray.
I have one question. I think we should also discuss or have some sort of a understanding of what the protocol would be if perchance somebody is tested positive who has been at the rental. What do we do? Meaning, is the rental shut down for a quarantine period? Those kind of things. Is there special cleaning protocols if somebody's been tested positive that stayed there? Those kind of issues. Some kind of discussion on those issues after the fact, so to speak.
Does anyone have any input on that topic there? About
So, Ron, I would say that we will, you will have a lot of information that you've been sent, but one of those is the AHLA protocols, procedures and protocols. And in that set of protocols, there is what they call room recovery in terms of how to basically what to do in the event that you have an identified case. And we'll kind of get to that. I think we'll get to that point in the in these bullets. But my personal opinion is that we would look to that document and the room recovery protocols in that document in terms of what an operation should do. If it was okay with the group, and this is kind of a personal opinion and I guess request, but personally I feel like and you have information that's been distributed to it, I feel like it's somewhat hotel centric. I mean, there's a lot of things in here that clearly apply to both. They kind of are generic and they would apply to all accommodations. There are also other things that I would say apply more to hotels. So if, as we go through these points, we could kind of get consensus as to whether or not that that provision should only pertain to hotels, or if it should pertain to all short-term rentals and hotels. So if it's okay with the group, I will start with safety and sanitary measures, and I'm not going to go through it verbatim, but I'm going to try to just pull out kind of summary points and then just see if we can get consensus on them and agreement as to whether or not they would apply to all accommodations, just hotels, or just short-term rentals. And once we've gone through that and we have some consensus, then we'll talk a little bit about other things that we've missed in this list and we may want to add in. If that sounds agreeable to everybody, you just kind of, I guess, nod, or if it's not good, give me a symbol. But going through that document, the first kind of set of bullets deals with guests' arrival. And I think that there's a lot there talking about checking in. And I think checking in clearly would apply to hotels. So there's a lot there that applies to hotels in terms of what to do at the check-in. I think it also would apply to operations like Island Realty. Sandy, I think you do have a lot of your visitors come through your office directly to go to a short-term rental, correct? So I think that the guest arrival bullet has a lot that deals with offices and hotels. Then there's some generic bullets in there dealing with, and this is one of my bullets, signage, basically getting the word out. I kind of boil those bullets down to say that we may want to consider having a sign of at the front of each rental that establishes the proper protocol and expectation of the guests, as well as a sign at the front of the offices where people would be checking into. Could I get a little, if anybody has comments about the idea of a sign at the front of every rental explaining the do's and don'ts, and a sign at the front of every hotel or short-term rental office explaining the do's and the don'ts? Kind of putting that out for comment.
Douglas, it's Frank. I think that's very reasonable and very important.
All right, good. Here.
Sorry.
I believe Stephen wanted to say something.
Yeah, I don't know if you wanted us to unmute ourselves to speak or how you want to do it, but I agree, absolutely. I would actually extend it to pre-messaging guests. We all send multiple emails before guests arrive. I think it's a good idea to make sure that that sign is packaged and included in all guest communications so that they understand. We all get so many communications. We all pass so many signs that we don't read, that we need to make the messaging repetitive and very clear.
Very
Okay.
good. I think that's a good comment.
I believe I saw Sandy raise his hand as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, so most of us with an office are interested in protecting our employees, ourselves, our guests, and we're going to do, and in most cases, we already had it prior to being shut down. How are we moving forward with this as proposed guidelines? Or are we moving forward, Douglas, with this as this will be the law of the land? and an owner that doesn't have signage when he greets, doesn't have taped off areas for distancing, are they going to be in violation? Where are we exactly with what we're talking about right now? We're entering the heart of the discussion now. And I want to understand if this is guidelines, suggested guidelines for all short-term vacation rental and hotel motel operators.
So Sandy, that's a good question, and it's one that, we'll need to, it'll be decided by city council ultimately. What they put in their emergency order was, or their emergency ordinance, was that we were to prepare guidelines and recommendations. So I would take that to mean that they would be guidelines, but Chief Cornett can tell me otherwise if he sees it otherwise, but I would envision if somebody were not to be following the guidelines, they would be given a visit and a reminder and an explanation of the guidelines, but probably not a ticket. I don't know that, that, like I said, that's my personal opinion, and it would ultimately be decided by city council, but that is kind of my reading of the tea leaves as to what's being requested of this group. Chief Cornett, do you have anything to add, or do you have any other feelings on that question?
No, I don't really think I've got anything to add. We're just kind of following suit with what you guys are recommending.
Sandy, does that answer your question, or did it give you follow-up questions?
A definite maybe, not.
Clear as mud. I think it's I personally believe it's guidelines. There, we will get to things that are
So this group can't make
governor's
anything
rules.
that is an ordinance. It would have to go through council before anything is decided on. What we're doing here is just making suggestions for council to consider moving forward as a way to design sort of a phased reopening plan.
Sandy, do you have specific feelings about that point? I mean, we've talked about that internally, but what, you raised the question because of concern or issue, or?
All of us, again, are concerned for the safety of ourselves, our employees, our families, our guests' interaction with those individuals and the general public. And none of us want to be the cause of any contagion moving forward. However, I don't see how some of what's in here being suggested, quite frankly, can be policed, or the expectation for policing it. So I'm hoping that it'll be taken and put out as a suggested guideline for folks. And all of you know we're dealing with human beings and we cannot manage behavior. So there'll be those that just aren't going to follow it, and their reputation will perceive them, and they won't get business, or they'll cause problems back there. Anyway, I'm okay. I don't have a specific other than I would hate for it to become law, if that makes sense.
Well, so for the rest of the group, is there consensus on that position, that what this group recommends? I think Sandy is saying his preference would be that they be guidelines. I think that's what my understanding is that they're requesting. Is there a contrary point to that, or does everybody agree that these should be guidelines and not a, say, ticketable offense?
All right. So I think I've got two people that want to say things, and I believe Scott raised his hand first. So I'm going to go to him, and then we'll go to Stephen.
The first thing I'm going to say is I did not get the extra documents. I only received the PDF of the schedule for this meeting. So if you could email them to me, Ron, that'd be great.
Absolutely.
I'm right with Sandy on that last issue. I just feel like we can't rewrite rental contracts. We can't, look over these people's shoulders all day long. Part of what we have to do as a community is work together and try not to rely on the police force to intervene all the time if we do see a problem. We have to tell people and say, hey, we're all in this together. We've opened this up. We have people who are opposed to it. We have people that are scared they're going to die. And, you know, we're just here to tell you, here, these are these guidelines so that we can keep doing this. And that's really all I have to say on the issue right now.
Stephen, can you unmute yourself? Did you have a comment?
Yeah, can you all hear me?
Yeah. So these guidelines, I think, are the ones that are enforced right now in Myrtle Beach that they implemented last week. I've spoken with the operators up there that are subject to these guidelines, and I believe they're in the same position, which is these are guidelines, and they believe that they're able to work to them and that most everybody is going to adhere to them. And again, it comes back to messaging. I think if you start developing too many complex rules and situations, then nobody ends up complying. This is, to me, a set of common sense processes that probably most of us were doing prior to the shutdown. So it shouldn't be difficult to transition back into them. We actually continue to operate short-term rentals outside of the beach communities, and pretty much have applied all of these in those units that were still allowed to be open during that time. At the end of the day, this ordinance also has an undue hardship statement in it, which I think is very important. We cannot continue to just load burdens onto homeowners who have suffered financially greatly, that is impacting their, in many cases, retirement, their future. They may lose homes. So, I think it's, at the end of the day, there's definitely different sides, but at the ultimate goal should be have something that's reasonable, that works reasonably for everybody.
Very good. It sounds like we have consensus on that point, so I'll make note of that, and we'll include that. Continuing, Scott, hopefully, I don't know, Ron, were you able to send Scott a copy of the?
Yes, I was.
Okay.
Have you received
Scott,
that
you
yet,
have it?
Scott?
We'll go through them, and so I'll explain them as we go. So I don't know that it's critical that you have them in front of you. Next, well, we have one there. We have beyond signage, we have just ensure adequate air circulation. I think that none of you would have guests at all if you didn't provide adequate air circulation. So I'm going to take that as happening already. The next bullet, and I know this is going to be kind of the bullet is during periods of low to medium occupancy, guests should be assigned non-adjacent rooms whenever possible. So I think that provision's clearly aimed at hotels when you're kind of, half full, that you wouldn't put everybody in the same floor, which you may do otherwise, I'm guessing. But Frank and Aaron, I think that's one really for you. Do you see that as any kind of problem, spacing the rooms out in the hotels?
Douglas, it's Frank. No, not at all. The only thing I'd note if we leave that line in there is that's not even possible in a condominium building, as you've already stated. So I wonder if it should be reworded to say specifically to hotels with a single owner versus any kind of a condo hotel or condominium building.
Okay, that's a good point. Yeah,
I can add that in there.
And it's a good time maybe for me to bring this general point up. As I've read through the whole thing, there are several points that, starting with signage, that refer to a building. And I think it's important that property managers of individual buildings sign off on these. Pick a complex in Walden, like Ocean Club. They have their own manager. So they'll be the ones deciding to post signage about elevator usage, social distancing usage. They'll be the ones making decisions about how to operate their swimming pools. And then the final thing they'll be deciding on is, I guess, in general, cleanliness. So little things like the elevator buttons, putting hand sanitizer out. You know, our policy is to have hand sanitizer at every elevator. And as you state in here, no more than one person per elevator. None of us rental companies can control that in an independent condominium building. So I think as we go through, it's important just to kind of figure out what their role is in this.
Aaron, do you have anything to add? Oh, Aaron, go ahead. If you have something to add for on hotels.
Yeah, as far as guidelines, I agree with what Frank says a lot. And we are a condo hotel. Each unit is individually owned. So it is going to make it difficult to a certain extent. But I think where demand is, at least for the next 30 days, you know, with not having rooms adjacent with one another, we should be able to make that happen. And just something I've tried to do is I'm really going to try and direct our guests to use the elevator if only absolutely necessary and really stick more to the stairwells. Our corridors are open air, so we don't have issues with circulating the air, which I think will make people feel a little bit more comfortable. But I could see some more issues if we did have an enclosed environment.
And Sandy, I think you put your hand up, Sandy. Go ahead.
Yes, so already we've got 3 different categories in my mind. We've got short-term rental regulations. We've got, if you will, hotel motel regulations. And then we have the HOA or regime entity that Frank is pointing out for that type of operation, who oversees the elevator being a great example of, I don't have any control over the elevators at Ocean Club. That's not me, but I manage Ocean Club units. So I can agree to this, but I need buy-in from the homeowners association for that.
Okay, Scott, did you have a comment? You're muted, Scott, if you can unmute.
Hang on, I got him.
Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
So with the condos associations, I was on the Summer House board. I was actually president of it for a while, unfortunately. And I think that we should rely on those groups to distribute this information and use them as a resource. Get them involved as much as we possibly can. Those people have a huge interest in keeping their businesses open. Most of those people rent them. You know, when we had the beach renourishment issue, those boards were essential in getting things done, and we need to rely upon them again.
Okay, very good. So to tie into occupancy, we're in section 4 of our agenda, and we're kind of boiling them all into one, which I think is fine, but limits of occupancy. I know that that's a point that's been battered around in terms of limiting occupancy at short-term rentals. And I'll just, for the benefit of the group, give a little bit of background on occupancy. The city has always, well, since they began regulating short-term rentals 15 or so years ago, there is already a limit on occupancy. And it was based on the number of the number of bedrooms plus a square footage arrangement. It was a person for every 250 square feet of gross floor area, or 2 people per bedroom plus 2. That got tightened several years ago to only be 2 people per bedroom plus 2, or 12, whichever of those is less. So you have different occupancies out there, but I guess the overall kind of guiding principle is that occupancy, there is already an established occupancy limit on all short-term rentals out here. I know that I think that Folly Beach has gone the avenue not of regulating occupancy additionally, but they've gone towards limiting the length of stay to 6 days. And I know this is probably the toughest in this group to deal with, but are there comments, and just personally, I have thought about what if, and you have the other confusing part of you have the governor's order basically limiting any social gathering to 3 people or a household. But this is probably the hardest point in all of these to deal with, is what do we do about occupancy limits, and specifically in my mind the higher, let's just take for example a house with an occupancy limit of 20 or greater. I think that's going to be the point of concern for those in the community. And just if you could provide comments on your thoughts on what the city should do related to those higher occupancy short-term rentals.
Douglas, it's Frank. I've been wondering about that when I saw the policy come out. And boy, I just think, number one, it's a really difficult thing to police. And my fear is that it's going to be left in the hands of residents, even potentially, create unnecessary calls. I also think that I guess I feel like between the livability officer and that staff and the current occupancy guidelines, those are hard enough to enforce. I think just keeping those in place as is, and then managing exceptions when a situation gets out of control is probably the right thing to do, in my opinion.
Go ahead, Beth.
So I don't have a dog in the fight for larger homes, but so the mainstay of my business is in smaller units with smaller occupancy with shorter stays for people that maybe can't go and be in a big house on the water or whatever. And if we were to go to a minimum of 6 nights, that would totally sink almost every reservation on the calendar for the rest of the year. So, I mean, people want to come to the beach, but not everyone can spend the money, take the time, for 6 nights. I think that's a huge consideration.
All right, Sandy.
We have 2 questions here. Occupancy and length of stay. On the occupancy, the statistics on the community for the number of properties that this would affect is minimal. The bulk of our properties are, I think 30% of them are 1 bedroom. I forget what the 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom, 5 bedroom breakdown are. And so my question kind of is, minimizing occupancy is an arbitrary program, and I don't know that it accomplishes keeping the residents, the occupants, safe or not. Will there be a policing factor? How do you deal with that? To Frank's point, that's a tough one. The chief can better address that. He has occupancy limits now. So where I'm going is basically, I believe that what Douglas, you mentioned before, our occupancy limits are in line with keeping the community safe moving forward. We've really not had any issues, and I wouldn't expect any, given the current market.
Brian, I don't know if Brian is still here. And I don't know if you would have a comment, Brian, on whether or not, take for instance, and we're going to go right to the kind of worst case scenario, but let's talk about it. You have a house that has 20 people in it, a short-term rental. I would assume that they're not all from the same household. So you're talking about 4 or 5 families sharing in the rental of a large house. Is that from a medical standpoint? Would that give you safety concern or health concern if a community were doing that? And if so, what would that concern be?
Hang on, Brian, you're still muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, so a couple of things come to mind just for consideration. And again, I think really I'm just trying to listen and hear if there's anything that sounds, kind of like it would not be something recommended and then kind of pass up the line. But I'll just say that the metrics right now are trending in a direction that is starting to look more hopeful. And I think that the goal is to keep those metrics moving in a direction that hopefully is moving more and more towards the hopeful side of things. And the key going forward will be largely, in my opinion, moving, if things continue in that direction, more towards containment. So cases develop, maybe there's a case cluster, contain that cluster, keep it from spreading. The research right now, of course, is new. People still don't know this disease very well. We're learning things every day. But there have been instances where things like ventilation has played a role in spreading the disease from an infected to susceptible individuals. And so it gets into the weeds of how many properties have different airflow and what the ventilation is like. And if one person is sick in one part of the property, could that airflow move into another part of the property and potentially infect people? So it's kind of a difficult question to answer in terms of yes, there's a higher risk, no, there's not a higher risk, because it's largely contingent on each property. But I would say that when I look at the recommendations and the suggestions and the ideas about, if it's possible to spread people out and maybe have a lower occupancy where possible, I think that lends itself more potentially to the containment strategy that may hopefully be arriving soon. That would keep case counts from turning in the other direction and moving in a direction that is not as hopeful. I think anything that keeps those case counts and future infections trending in a more positive direction that also allows for improved economic activity is obviously a positive thing.
Can I jump in on some of those issues? I think, to Sandy's point, 75% of vacation homes in Isle of Palms are 3 bedrooms or less. 38% are 1 bedroom. So what that means is we generally have family groups that come. Yes, there are some bigger homes that have bigger groups. In talking to people that have reservations who've been bombarding us daily with when are you opening, what's happening, we're seeing a couple of trends. One is if there are vulnerable people in their party, they are not going to come. They're going to stay home probably. They don't want to come to the beach. They don't want to travel. They are going to protect themselves. The other family members want to get out of their house and for their own sanity, don't want to lose money, don't want to get into a debate over who pays for what, and they want to use the property. So I think the first thing you're going to see is there's no real demand right now, given everybody's living under this, for big, large groups coming to the beach or getting together. Yeah, there are stories, but point raised, you have to police those incidents. You can't lock everybody else out in the expectation that that's going to keep it from happening. In talking to Myrtle Beach earlier today, because they opened up and are able to take new bookings, they have not seen a surge bookings of people wanting to come to the beach yet. There are several factors for that, but I think we have to say right now, if you open up and say, all right, we're going to start allowing bookings again, we're not immediately going to jump to 100% occupancy. A lot of people don't have jobs, a lot of economic issues and concerns. Yes, some people have already got bookings. And if you look at the calendar, I think, we're talking about existing home reservations just for the second half of May of around about 30 to 40% of bookings still on the books for people to come. And now homeowners and hosts and property managers canceled a lot of bookings to date, and the economic damage is piling up, and it should not go undiscussed. You then look at the summer, the market as a whole is about 50 to 60% occupied already for the summer. Those are bookings of all lengths, 2 days, 3 days. I mean, anybody that's just an Airbnb host will know that the majority of their bookings, because Airbnb incentivizes this, are shorter stays. They don't follow the 7-day model at all. So once you get into starting to legislate a minimum stay requirement or an occupancy requirement, you're going to impact a lot of bookings. Folly did announce 6 days for, basically they didn't write it this way, but they announced it for May because they required us all to cancel our bookings through the end of May. So our calendars are empty. That damage has already been done. So opening up on a basis of going 6 days is doable, frankly. How you layer that in on top of everything that we have already is going to be extremely challenging. So I think it goes back to, is there going to be a rush of demand? Probably not. Certainly not while pools are closed. DHEC hasn't come forward yet and said it's okay to open communal pools. We're seeing high demand for our homes with private pools, and I think that will continue. But I think to some extent it goes back to messaging. We should be, and people are being hit by this messaging all the time. Socially distancing, stay in your family unit, only come to the beach on vacation if you're going to obey the rules and abide by those rules. But the policing and enforcement, and I don't just mean for the chief, I mean for us. I don't know that legally I can ask people whether they're all part of the same family unit without being exposed to discrimination lawsuits. So, and no one's going to indemnify us or homeowners for the results of some of these things. So at the end of the day, we go back to the governor's message. It's time to protect ourselves. We can message, but when you start trying to layer on rules on top of everything that's already been done, then it becomes hard to know where we're going.
Cliff, I don't think you've said anything yet, so I'm going to go ahead and call on you first.
Okay, thank you. Just on limiting lengths of stay, I've seen some stuff out there about talking about, basically leaving fallow days between stays and that kind of thing. I think we ought to discuss that here so that it's at least been brought up. From what I think, what Mr. Goodwin said, and I think most of what I've read is too, is that really doesn't do anything because the virus does not live on surfaces for that long. So I would like us to maybe have a little bit of discussion about that. I think that's where limiting the length of stay may spark that type of discussion. So I think we ought to have that so that we've at least addressed it here.
Brian, would you like to speak to that? Do you have any comments on like fallow days or anything like that in between stays?
No, I really don't think I could comment on that.
Okay. Anyone else? Hang on, Sandy?
I muted myself. Couple of things come to mind. So Douglas, I want to go back to your original question about occupancy limits. So a home that typically sleeps 20 is probably, I'm gonna pick a number because we're picking numbers, 5,000 square feet. And what is 20 into 5,000?
Yeah, it's a 60, so 22 would be a 6,200 square foot or 10-bedroom house.
Okay, but how many square feet per person?
250. So in the old days, it was 250.
Okay, so a 1-bedroom condominium that sleeps 4 people, sea cabins, for example, or a tad over, they're under 500 square feet, so we're dealing with 100 and square feet and change. So how is that more viable than a 5,000 or 6,000 square foot house with 20 occupants? But my point being that I think there needs to be more science to the occupancy, and that our rules actually are very much in line for regulating the occupancy of these properties. I get the concern. The distancing between reservations, I think I heard you allude to, Ron. Should there be between checkout and arrival, should there be a time period for the COVID-19, if present, to die off? There are a lot of alternatives. We're looking at the cleaning guidelines that we've talked about for how to do that. On top of that, I am aware of right now 5 EPA approved chemicals, some green, some not green, that within a matter of minutes you can fog a house for not a lot of money, with a guarantee in some cases of a 30-day guarantee from some of the providers that COVID-19 is not present. So I can take a house and for not a lot of money, if my owners are willing to spend it, put a guarantee on it that COVID-19 is not present. These are EPA approved chemicals, 5 of them that I know of right now, that are being used by the hotel and motel industry when needed. So just normal cleaning, I think, as we're seeing in the guidelines, is extremely effective as well. But there are alternatives to some of the things that people are afraid of, and making these emotional suggestions on. That's me.
All right, Scott, you're raising your hand as well.
Yes, I just wanted to say that a lot of these big houses, the primary people that are renting them are people like Cliff referred to earlier. They're families that come back. That's usually the grandma, the grandpa, the adult kids, and the grandchildren. And those are the majority of folks that are renting these big, larger houses that have the greater occupancy. And I think we need to consider that we don't want to shoo them away. They've been coming here every year. They've been renting. They've been good business for somebody in this business. And, I just think we need to consider that. I don't think limiting the occupancy is the solution, nor do I think a fallow day is appropriate.
I concur on the fallow day idea, and Folly dropped this after some discussion, and I'd sent them a document on fallow days and cleaning. The reality is, as I said at the start, the virus is easily killed. Sandy's right. You can, if you choose to, fog a home. You don't have to. The virus is transmitted by water droplets that are emitted from the nose or mouth. Those fall under gravity onto the surfaces in a home. Whilst they may hang in the air for up to an hour, typically, as the longest time that you would expect them to be airborne, by the time your cleaning team gets there, and the cleaning team should be wearing masks and gloves. I think we all will agree on that. Then it's just, as the Hotel Association cleaning guidelines say, it is the liberal application of disinfectant to every surface. It is the liberal application of disinfectant to every high touch point. And it is the time that disinfectant has to sit per the manufacturer's instructions that kills the virus. So, we have to make sure all of our cleaning teams and any host that cleans themselves understands that the number one action that we can take to combat this virus and make homes safe for anybody to enter is to put the disinfectant on and leave it for the 2 minutes or the 5 minutes. And on the EPA, there are hundreds of approved chemicals. Those that kill the coronavirus, the longest contact time is 10 minutes. That's it. So we're not talking about a big process. We're talking about plenty of disinfectant. You leave it on for the 2 minutes, the 5 minutes. There are some that do it in seconds. And then you wipe it and clean it and make it look nice for the next get. So long as you're doing that, there's no reason why, given the length of time between turnovers, that house is not ready for the next guest to come in. Now, I will tell you the CDC guidelines also say you should disinfect soft furnishings, and so you should be looking to spray, carpets, etc. But remember, the home isn't quite the same as the high traffic areas of many of the hotels and many of the condo buildings. It doesn't have as much use in those areas as a public space does from people not staying in the home anyway. So it's cleaning, and messaging.
So I think that we can say that on this call that there's consensus in no fallow days. I haven't heard anybody speak in favor of the idea of limiting the occupancy more than it's already limited, or limiting the length of stay to follow suit with Folly Beach. So if anybody hasn't said anything that they want to say, you can say that now, but I think we can say that there's consensus on those points. Just a question, and I think that the general public and council will be looking there. I think they're going to be interested in that point in particular. I know that that's going to be a topic of discussion. So have those of you that are following this in terms of the governor's orders, do you have issues reconciling his orders of no social gatherings of 3 or more, or being in a household together? Would you all as managers feel as though if you were to make an arrangement that was contrary, that was more than, it was 5 unrelated people, would you have concerns? And I, quite frankly, what I'm trying to do is if there is a point that's already, you're going to do it already because by virtue of the governor's order, that we should include in there as, hey, we're going to comply with it, whether the task force guidelines include it or not. But I'm curious on that point. For those of you that have the larger rentals, do you have concern of being contrary to the governor's order?
I think it goes back to the question, what we're allowed to ask and what we're allowed to assume. And I don't know that we're in a position where we can make an assumption as to whether that group is a family unit or not. And I think I would defer, as everyone here would, to, and Scott's laughing because that's a tough legal question that I don't think you're going to find anyone on here say yes or no to.
Scott will say it. Go ahead. You're muted though.
Hold up. There you go.
There you are.
You're good.
I was laughing because exactly what the definition of a family is today is not what it was even 10 years ago. And, I just don't think we need to get into those issues. And I think an ancillary issue that we haven't talked about here, that I saw when I was in this rental business, and I saw with my own family coming here annually, that we need to address, that comes out of the fallow and the whole cleaning issue, is people like to come here, like to get here before they can technically check into their house. They're always waiting to say, can we just put our bags there? Can we go out to the beach? And I think we need to put a guideline that says, until you have an actual check-in time, you aren't to be anywhere near this property. That needs to be put in stone so that we don't have that, and we don't have guests coming that are on top of cleaning crews trying to shoo them out of homes.
Hey, Douglas, it's Frank. Back to your original question, though, honestly, I can't imagine a way that we can question the relationship of people in a home. I think you're asking for a lot of trouble, and you would put us as managers in a position of clearly on the edge of a discrimination suit. Like Scott just said, their relationship to each other is not our business. It just isn't. I mean, that's almost like now getting to the point of us asking every single person that stays in a property, where have you been in the last 2 weeks? Have you traveled outside the country? Have you traveled outside the state? Have you left your house? Have you gone to the grocery store? I just think you start going down a path that is, really slippery and dangerous. And I don't see, frankly, from my perspective, I don't see the benefit of determining what relationship those folks are to each other in a home.
So that was kind of the answer that I would have kind of thought we might get. But would there be, in the eyes of this group, an issue with the guidelines that come out of this group saying a generic statement, something to the effect of compliance with the governor's orders, is expected, or some expectation? And I guess I nod to the fact that as the governor chooses to enact and rescind orders, all of this is kind of a fluid situation, and that maybe this group's position is, that's up to the governor. He has established those rules, and we'll defer to him on those issues. Does that sound like a kind of a reasonable approach to that? See a thumbs up? Okay. I think, why don't we have that be the position, or the recommended position is, we'll just state that, you gotta adhere to the governor's orders, and kind of leave it at that. And as they change, and as guidance changes, that will too change. So I think we had kind of internally scheduled an hour and a half for this meeting, and we're quickly approaching that. But I do think that in our list of safety and sanitary measures, we do start to get to a lot of just kind of common sense things about sanitizing high traffic areas, keeping a list of high touch objects, keeping a log of cleaning, how frequently that's done. You then, in this list, you then get into food and beverage, which I would defer. I mean, I think that's really an issue just for the hotels, and really probably just the Boardwalk Inn. So I don't know that we need to dwell on that too much in this group. I think that's pool areas. We've kind of touched on that, but
hang on, Frank.
Go ahead, Frank. Go ahead.
Thanks,
Frank.
Ron. Douglas, the only thing, and maybe I'm reading it poorly, but as I looked at section C in the document, it appears to be written, I mean, the title cleaning procedures is clear that it's cleaning, and I assume everywhere, because this has to do short-term rentals. And yet the copy in there talks about, or is written as if it's public space. So for example, the first bullet point's fine, although it refers to break rooms and things like that. The second bullet says maintain a logbook of cleaning, date and time. As far as I know, almost every vacation rental on the Isle of Palms is cleaned on departure. So that just seems to be worded poorly. Like it doesn't.
So,
the
Frank, I think that wording is specific to hotels. And I guess, when you read it in a framework of thinking of your hotel,
Yes, and yet then I'm wondering, and I hate to bring this up, but where are the guidelines for within a unit?
yes. So I think, as we, some of these clearly are geared towards hotels, and I would want to kind of clean that up and break the parts that are clearly dealing with hotels, have the guide and say, this is what we suggest for a hotel. When we talk about a short-term rental unit, Steve would need to be modified to basically
Okay, good.
say, keep a list of high-touch objects, keep a logbook of when they're cleaned, require the cleaning staff to wear gloves, clean the surfaces with the appropriate. So I think that there would actually be two different procedures there carved out, one for hotels and then a modified one for the short-term rentals.
Yeah, it actually sounds to me like it would be one for public spaces where a facility has public spaces. And again, I think that might apply to some condominium building managers. And then I think the other section would be in-unit cleaning, whether it's a hotel room or a vacation rental.
I would agree.
Okay, Scott, I think I saw you raise your hand. Do you have something to say?
Myself, no. I was just going to ask, and I'm kind of putting it out there to all of y'all. Doesn't Island Realty and the hotels, don't they already have logs of these cleanings for the most part in place? And if so, can we not just rely on that in some reality here? I know people, at least I would think they have those procedures in place already. Perhaps some of y'all can elaborate on that and figure out how we put that into the fold here.
My hunch would be that the bigger operations do, and I don't know if there's anybody here that would, so I don't think that's anything different that you would be doing, but that the smaller operations that are being managed individually may not, and they may need to kind of develop that protocol. Anybody have any comments on that?
I agree. Again, I continue to remain focused on, you all think of it this way. Our guests are staying in a building that when we tell them we have sanitized as our guest, they're going to assume, I think, that the building they're staying in has sanitized. So I'll throw out the example of pools and regimes again. We're sort of letting the governor decide when to open them. But I'd say to you, how are the chairs being sanitized? For example, we're very concerned about public areas of a rental agency's office. And yet I think we should be more concerned about the pool chairs at a pool. I know at Wild Dunes, we'll have a sanitation procedure for every pool chair, lounge chair, to start the day. And then we're placing sanitation stations for a guest to use, with the assumption that a guest will want to be assured their chair's been sanitized, so they'll want to do it themselves. Of course, we'll assist if they wish. But I'm just concerned about what we communicate to our guests, and then they go to this building, and elevators may have not been addressed, and pools especially may have not been addressed, let alone doorknobs on common spaces, and many of the other guidelines that are in the document. And so, yeah, I agree, Douglas. I think us larger organizations probably have these guidelines in place already.
Ray?
Yeah, another thing is restrooms at pools. Our rental is has a community pool for 12 homes, and there's a restroom in there. So who is responsible, or what is the mechanism to clean the restroom after somebody uses it?
Okay, Sandy?
Muted myself. To answer that question, at what point is the consumer responsible for their actions? I am going to develop not guaranteeing, for just the reasons you mentioned, pool furniture, guests staying at a port of call, or over at Sea Oats. The responsibilities really are on you, the individual that's utilizing that equipment. I do not believe that we can police and make a homeowners association or a homeowner property responsible for cleaning the pool furniture, the handrail, the knobs on the gates in and out of these pools. I mean, it's just at some point, you as an individual have to take responsibility, and that would be the disclaimer, the disclosure that you need to make to the consuming public, who should be aware. The word should means that's opinion. Some will look to blame, but I don't think we can take that responsibility on. Let me give you an example. In this article in C on our form cleaning procedures, it states here on the first bullet point, Frank, create a list of high-touch surfaces requiring routine disinfecting, environmental cleaning, and in parentheses, e.g., workstations, countertops, handrails, doors, doorknobs, bathrooms, break rooms, elevators, and other common areas. Such surfaces shall be disinfected hourly. I don't think hourly is enough. Pool furniture, great example. You get up, I sit down. You use the elevator, I disinfect it, and the next guy walks in and he's, touches everything, and it hasn't been disinfected for an hour, and I come back in 59 minutes later and touch where you were. I just, at some point, I've got to take responsibility for I'm entering into a situation where I may be at risk at age 66. Do I wear gloves? Do I carry my hand sanitizer? Am I wearing my mask? And I think that needs to be put back on the guest and employees to some extent.
Sandy, I agree with you 100%, and I apologize if I misled that. What we're doing here is we're writing guidelines or proposing guidelines that the city will want to issue to help ensure a safe environment for visitors. So all I'm saying is that as hotels, buildings like ours or the Palms has to abide by these guidelines or whatever guidelines are passed, I think we overlook individual condominium buildings and not make recommendations to those condominium buildings. All the work we're going through is pretty much useless. To me, what we're doing here, the truth of what we're doing here is opening safely. And to me, that means I don't want to hear about a visitor to the Isle of Palms. Not my resort, not your property, I don't want to hear about a visitor to the Isle of Palms that picked up COVID because they stayed in a vacation rental, and I don't think any of us do. So to me, those two items are super high touch items, elevators and pools. And I think it would be, remiss of us not to ask the city to just include suggestions to those regime managers. Whether they follow them or not, that's their issue. Whether the city chooses to make them mandatory regulations, I don't even care to get involved in that. I just appreciate the city is willing to come up with recommendations so we create a safe environment for our guests. That's it.
All right, Stephen?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I think there's one other issue that people are letting me know is important, and that is timing. I think we set it up at the top, recommendations by the 7th, so the city can act. People are very conscious now that the road barrier is going to be removed tomorrow, that there is no real way to enforce vacation rentals. Individual operators who want to invite people down at the weekend, that I think it behooves us all to act quickly to get these recommendations pulled together and out and communicated. just for the safety of everybody.
Go ahead, Beth. Hang on. Looks like you're still muted.
Okay.
There.
So,
okay.
So the properties that I manage are all at the Ocean Inn, which there's 20 condos there, all individually owned, no on-site office, no on-site maintenance. I do feel like there should be a provision that, you know, as we talk about us providing, I'm a property manager, but I'm also a board member. And so as we're talking about what's inside the unit, that's one set of rules. And then we're talking about what is in the public spaces or the common spaces by the pool, in the laundry room, all those things. I do feel like if I don't have someone on site, which I don't, to go and clean those things, at least I should provide a way for anyone who feels the need to wipe off the handle, or, you know, that they want to wipe down their chair, you know, to Frank's point, that if I'm not there to do it, at least I can provide a way for that person to do it. By the same token, it talked in here about providing cleaning materials. You know, if anyone goes into our condos and for some reason feels they're either going to bring their own Lysol or they're going to, you know, bring their own cleaning materials, but we'll provide them so that they can have that extra measure of confidence that they can double, triple disinfect their surfaces. So I do feel like it's important, while we're handing the responsibility, not handing, but we're helping with the guests' comfort, that we provide what they need so that they can feel like they have what they need to make themselves safe and comfortable.
Okay, anybody else? Go ahead, Scott.
I was just going to say, it appears we've got three different types of rentals that we're looking at. The ones that are individually managed, the hotels, the condos, and then or the hotels and the condos. And the hotels have procedures for their management of their common areas. So should the HOAs for the condos. And if we're talking about trying to clean some things like doorknobs and elevators, we should probably put some kind of guideline in that says that those entities are going to be responsible for having some type of cleaning solution near these commonly used doors and whatever else. I don't know exactly what the answer is, but it seems like we need to put that burden on the specific entities that can control those common areas.
Okay. Douglas, I believe we're kind of running out of time here. So is there anything else that we need to touch on?
I think that we have, so as we go through that list of measures, I think we've been through all the tough ones. We then, you know, kind of towards the end, I think that we get very much into basically common sense type things and things that this, you know, CDC recommends that we all do. So I would propose, if it's okay with everybody, that, and I don't know what everybody's schedule is, but I would propose that we take the items that we feel like we got consensus on today, and then merge that in with what I would, you know, kind of put as common sense best practices that are in this safety and sanitary measures document, merge them together, and I would try to get them to you by the end of tomorrow, with the hope that we could get together, because I think that the deadline set for us by council is Thursday. If we could get together on Thursday at the same time, 1 o'clock, review that document together, and then with the hope of sending forward a recommendation to City Council for their consideration. Does anybody have an issue or a timing problem with that proposal? Get thumbs up. Everybody's
Got a lot of
available.
thumbs ups. Yep.
All right.
Sounds like we're good.
Well, good. I really thank everybody for attending, and I think that was a very useful and productive meeting. And we will get to work and kind of mashing this all together and hopefully get you something by the end of tomorrow, and we'll see you on Thursday.
All right. See everybody then. Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.